Well, good morning, everybody. It's good morning if you are joining us live on our ChicagoBearsLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. We do it every Friday morning at 9:30. If you have just downloaded it as a podcast, that's great too, but you're missing the opportunity to participate. You can go to at any time at 9:30 Chicago time on Friday morning at Sean_Hammond, at Kyle Nabors, or at Hub _Arkush. Those are our three Twitter accounts. And that will get you into our StreamYard link where we broadcast this podcast live. It allows fans to join us, have questions, participate, and let us know what's on your minds and the things you'd like to hear us most talk about. Us includes myself. I'm Hub Arkush, and of course, our Chicago Bears insider beat reporter, Sean Hammond, and our Shaw Media Group sports editor, Kyle Nabors. And guys, we probably could do 3 or 4 hours this morning. We won't, but there is more than enough to talk about. And yeah, I think everybody's focused right now, if you're a Bears fan, or for that matter, people around the NFL, on head coach hirings, on GM openings. One thing quickly that just stuns me is 10 days ago, odds on, this wasn't just my opinion, it wasn't my opinion, it was what I was hearing from people around the league. We thought it would be the fewest head coaching openings we'd seen in years, maybe 3, maybe 4. 8 jobs now open. The Houston Texans inexplicably and I think inexcusably fired David Culley late this week. We can just touch on that in a little while. But with 8 job openings, nobody except for the 2 teams that had to fire coaches or lose coaches in season had gotten into the portal 2 weeks early. So everybody with the same starting point. 6 teams of the 8, and now all 8 teams looking for head coaches. There's 3 general manager openings as well. And it started for the Bears Monday of this past week when George McCaskey held his season-ending press conference. And it wasn't much better than the ones he's had in the past. As you may recall, he and Ted Phillips took an absolute beating for their press conference a year ago. That was January 11th of 2021. I thought a lot of that was unjustified because I didn't really think that there was any excuse to fire Matt Nagy or Ryan Pace. They spent the 2021 season proving me wrong, and clearly there had to be change this week. And yet, again, the way that George McCaskey, the owner and chairman of the board of directors of the Chicago Bears, obviously co-owns the team with his 8 siblings and his mom, he didn't present a lot of hope, I think, for Bears fans that ownership was in a position to get this right. And so, Sean, I guess we'll start there. I don't know if you agree, but I think that's kind of been the overwhelming consensus coming out of another unfortunate press conference.
Yeah, I don't know how that isn't the overwhelming consensus. I mean, you heard really similar things to what we heard a year ago, and the situation is different. They made a different decision. I thought George's press conference started off the first 15 or 20 minutes. He was saying the right things and it was going relatively well, but it just seemed like the more they talked, the more they answered questions, the more downhill things went, and the weirder it got with the Olin Kreutz stuff. And it was just a really, really strange day in Bears land.
Kyle, I think I agree with Sean. I had the first question in the press conference. That's I guess you call it an honor that the Bears give to the senior beat reporter. And I've been doing this longer than anybody else on the beat. And I had 2 or 3 really good questions, and George answered them in his opening statement, because obviously the concern was, will there be one person in charge of the football operation with unfettered control, reporting only to ownership? And his initial statement, that was kind of where he started. And then, beyond that, would that person have the authority to hire the head coach? And he had said, yes, that's what we're going to do. But then before he finished his opening statement, he talked about the committee, to the interview committee to do the selection process was going to include Ted Phillips. Or actually, I don't even remember if he said that. I don't think that came up until later, because that would have been my first question if it had. But after telling Bears Nation what they wanted to hear, they then just did nothing but muddy the water about who really is involved and what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, he comes out and says the final decision will be mine, which of course already gives a little bit of pause. But you when you double down with having Ted Phillips in the room as well, there was that level of optimism, after the firings happened and before that press conference. We actually did the live stream, and you could kind of sense it with people asking what was going to happen, how we felt. And the Bears put out the release and had no mention of Ted Phillips. And I think it kind of set the standard right off the bat there, that everyone kind of assumed, okay, that means Ted's going to be off to the side or not a part of this. And then, George says that, Ted is busy with the stadium, and it's, but then you say, well, Ted's going to be in the room. And I actually kind of understand why you would still want him there. I mean, he is your money guy. He's probably going to be the person that has to negotiate those contracts. He's the person that's best suited for that. But I mean, just having him on the press conference was kind of weird. Like, he just sat there for a half an hour with no questions for him. And if you wanted him to answer questions about the stadium or make him available to talk about Arlington Heights, you could have said at the beginning, Ted is more than happy to meet with the media. We're going to set up something later in the week. He'll answer all your questions on Arlington Heights, but today we're focused on the future of the general manager and head coach.
It's not important, but now it's just bugging me. As I recall, and then we'll get off of this, what he did was he came out and he said, George has persuaded me that with all his attention turned towards the stadium, I don't think he did tell us he was on the selection committee until after the questions started, because that I think probably would have been my first question was, if he's not involved, why is he on the selection committee? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter as long as Bill Polian is the only voice that is heard by George McCaskey, because he's the only one in the room qualified, to be really making these suggestions. I guess George will make the final decision. And then, as you say, there was some stuff that just kind of went off the rails. The thing that bugged me the most, Sean, is that, and George, it's interesting because I think he used this as a shield a little bit. I don't know if we'll ever know, what life behind the walls is, or behind the doors, I should say, at Hallis Hall is. I've had some other good contacts who had extensive careers with the Bears who are now working elsewhere reach out since the press conference to share their thoughts about it. I don't think we do know the whole story behind, the quarterback situation, the handling of it this season, in spite of George's rather strange denial. But that was the part that really got me, was when asked the question specifically, he said he was uncomfortable with Matt even discussing it with him because he's just a fan. And, I go back to this constantly because I've known these people my whole professional career, and I really like them. The McCaskey family are good people, and George is a good guy. But are they qualified to own a football team? Why, if you own a multi-billion-dollar business, would you seemingly almost take pride in the fact that you're not an expert on the business that you own, and that you just want to lump yourself in with your customer base? That seems to be where the disconnect starts. And it is so different from the other family ownership groups around the league. The most comparable comparisons here are the Steelers and the Giants. The Rooney family and the Mara family, the children of the owners, grew up in the business, became students of the game, and made it their life's work. They are two of the more successful organizations in the NFL. Giants fans wouldn't say that right now, but you look at what they've done, just over the last 2-3 decades compared to the Bears. And the Steelers are arguably the most successful organization. They're now run by children and grandchildren. In the Bears case, none of the McCaskey kids decided to make it their life's work. They all pursued other endeavors, which is fine. I'm not judging them for it. But you would think that if the family was so dead set on continuing to own the business, which they are, that somebody would be qualified to run it. And I think the takeaway we get from all of this is what, many folks have been saying for a long time, is that there's not great hope that things will change under McCaskey ownership.
Whatever happened, Hub, to fake it till you make it? I mean, McCaskey, he has an opinion. He says he loves to talk football with his football guys, but that whole description of that conversation about the quarterback position was really strange and really odd. He comes off as I don't know, maybe he's been told so many times, or maybe he thinks that he doesn't have a big enough background in football, so it just comes off as wishy-washy and like he doesn't know what he's doing. And you're right. I mean, you're running a football organization. I'm sure he has some opinion on who the quarterback should be.
I can't remember if it was during that response or if it was at another point. I think it was at another point where he said, he also said, I'm not a football evaluator. I'm just a football fan. And it's like that this is not the press conference to make that admission, buddy.
Well, that's exactly my point, Kyle. I mean, you're sitting down saying, all right, Bears Nation, trust me, we're going to get it right this time. And then, you take that approach to it. It's really tough. But I do think that Bears fans should take some solace in the fact that Bill Polian's in the room. And I know that, that there are the negative folks, the haters. I mean, they are haters when they do stuff like this. Immediately, oh, he's a dinosaur. He's too old. He's been out of the game. First of all, do your homework. There are few people around the NFL today better connected than Bill Polian. He's the go-to guy for most folks in the league. He's been in media the last 10 years reporting on this stuff. So the fact that he's been out of a front office for 10 years is meaningless relative to his ability to conduct these interviews and to know where to go. Just look at the names that have come up so far. I mean, I don't think there's a doubter out there who'd heard of any of these GM candidates. So certainly the qualifications are there for that. And in terms of being out of touch with the game, again, it's silly. He's not. But beyond that, he's not a coach. He doesn't need to know how to run the zone read offense. He needs to know what's working in the NFL, and he does better than most. And I mean, the man's in the Hall of Fame. He's a 6-time executive of the year. I can't imagine getting a better opinion in the room. The question is, how much are they going to listen to him? And who's really going to be pulling the strings here? You've also got Soup Campbell, their director of player development, who is part of the process. And I was skeptical about this in the beginning. He and Tanisha Wade, who's their senior vice president in charge of I'm not sure what exactly diversity. Yes, diversity, inclusion, and obviously aimed at inclusion. Inclusion is what I was going for. And I don't think that they should have an opinion on who the final hires should be, but I think they should be there to be able to ask all the questions that Polian may not think about or may not be as focused on. Because for Bill Polian, it was never a problem. He's hired nothing but minority candidates, one of whom ended up in the Hall of Fame with him, and so I don't think it's an issue. And the fact that he's hired these outstanding coaches like Marv Levy and then you go to Tony Dungy and then Jim Caldwell, all of whom, led Super Bowl teams, tells you that obviously he knows what a coach needs to do to communicate with his players. But nonetheless, the inclusion of those two, as long as they are back checks, so to speak, that's fine. Again, why Ted is in the room is a mystery to me at this point. But clearly, everybody has their go-to guy. Everybody has their right hand. With Donald Trump, it's been Rudy Giuliani, and with no comment on, anybody's politics or anything like that, certainly there are people who question, how could he be your guy? And so you look at George McCaskey and Ted Phillips. Now, I'm not comparing, well, I guess I just did. I don't mean to compare George and Ted to Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani. That's not where we're going here, but you get the analogy or the metaphor. I hope that's all I'm going for there. Is it's going to continue to puzzle people, and unfortunately, it has yielded nothing but negative results. And so, at the end of the day, I take great comfort in the fact that Bill Polian is there. Bill Polian is not perfect, and how much they're going to listen to him, we don't know. And so, Sean, that's the process that we're left with at this point.
Yeah, I have no problem with the committee, with there being a committee doing these interviews. I have no problem with. I think it's a great thing to have different points of view in the room. I do kind of wish they had more than one football opinion in the room, more than one Bill Polian type guy, because you don't know how much he's going to, how much influence is he going to have over the group as a whole, and how much are some of these other people going to be willing to voice a different opinion on a particular candidate. I think if you had multiple football people in there, you could get a little bit more discussion, in terms of just the football stuff you're talking about.
Well, Kyle, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sean.
Oh no, you can go.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. I just was going to say to Kyle, I couldn't agree with Sean more, but that's the problem I'm talking about. There are no more football people left. You just fired, Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy. If you're going to keep any of Ryan's people, then they have to be serious candidates for the top football job. And those people don't know if they're working. And so this is where I get back to, again, in the Rooney family, there are children and grandchildren who have now made this their life's work and who have football opinions. Same thing with the Mara family. They brought in the Tisch family 30 years ago, and the Tisch family has now also had, family members work in the organization. Now, in all fairness, George spent a lot of time as the ticket manager, but he was focused on selling tickets. You look at the rest of that board. Brian, who many of us, and I love Brian. Brian's a dear friend and a good guy. And I think Brian probably, well, I don't know even how Brian feels about his football acumen. We've never really discussed that, and so Brian would probably do a better job as the face of the organization than George, but I don't know if he's the businessman that George is. And guys, this is the part that always gets lost. It is the family business. It is a $4 billion asset. It was less than $1 billion asset when they took it over. Now, a lot of that is just thanks to the National Football League. I don't know how much they get credit for it, but we've seen other teams in financial disarray, that have been ruined by ownership. And that is not the case with the Bears. They have been successful on the business end. We can't, painting these people as incompetent boobs is a huge mistake because they are not that. They're just not football people. And so, Kyle, to Sean's point, yeah, he's right. We all would love to see that, but who would that other football person be? You're going to hire a second outside consultant who might come in and butt heads with Bill Polian, because Bill Polian's a kind of a crusty guy. I mean, that much, if you know Bill, and I don't know him personally, but I know his track record very well. And with his, incredible success have come some rough edges. So again, it's kind of the process they're left with. And I don't know this to be a fact. There's now, I want to say 21 grandchildren and maybe as many as 26 great-grandchildren. And I think some of the older great-grandchildren are now getting to the point where they've begun their professional lives. But to my knowledge, I don't know that. I don't know the age of the great-grandchildren. But you look at the masthead, we're not allowed to wander the building the way we used to. But there is no other, McCaskey prodigy that I'm aware of, that are involved in the organization.
I mean, the family a lot better than I do. But, going back to Bill Polian and, part of the reason, not the full reason, but Tanisha Wade and Soup Campbell being on there, it's not just about diversity. It's, you are right. Bill Polian has remained connected to the game. I don't think that should be a concern for Bears fans. One area that I think having Wade and Campbell in the room helps is with Bill Polian, and this where the age gap could make a difference, is things have changed a lot in the NFL over the last decade in terms of the way players interact with management and coaching, right? And I do think, like Soup Campbell in particular, who is the director of player engagement. I'm sorry if I'm getting that, but he interacts directly with the players in terms of their everyday lives. And I think having that perspective and making sure you're not bringing in someone who's just going to be an egomaniacal, one of those guys where they just run roughshod over the organization and kind of alienate your young core. I think that's part of the reason to have them on. But when it comes back to Bill Polian, and we've heard the comparison with Ernie Accorsi. Ernie Accorsi got good names in the room for the Bears. They just chose the wrong person. And that's what you got to, Bill Polian can bring you these great names. At the end of the day, the Bears still have to make the right choice. And that's, what we're all going to have to cross our fingers about.
Guys, listen, Ernie is a friend, a good friend. And I'm biased about this. I have been since the day it happened. But this is where, when people let facts and history get in the way, I get really annoyed. The two guys that Ernie Accorsi got them to hire were the coach of the year and the executive of the year in their first year together. I mean, that's the reality of it, okay? And the way this thing came apart since is in large part due to the fact that they weren't, as it turned out, necessarily the best choices. But again, I think we continue to see the level of dysfunction in this organization, and we just don't know how much it contributed to it. I also think one of the worst things that could have happened to Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy after their incredible, it wasn't Ryan's rookie year, it was his fourth year in the business, but their rookie year together was the whole 100th season celebration. And there wasn't a Bears fan alive who didn't think they were winning the Super Bowl in 2019. Think back, guys, to what went on after that. And then they had a really unfortunate run of injuries and other stuff. And then That's where I think Matt dug in his heels and just started to make mistakes, and things went south. But to your point about Ernie Accorsi, Bill Polian is Ernie Accorsi on steroids, human growth hormones, and everything else you can give him. I mean, Ernie was instrumental in building a couple Super Bowl teams for the Giants, but had help. He worked under George Young. He had Jerry Reese working for him. Bill Polian, from the ground up, has built two almost dynasties and three different, Super Bowl level football teams. And so, when you make your comparisons, again, just check the numbers, check the facts, and you'll see that this is a level above Ernie Accorsi.
I don't know if it really matters. That's what I'm saying. Like you had Bruce Arians and Chris Ballard in the room before, and you chose Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace.
Whoa, the two guys that you just mentioned, they both withdrew themselves from consideration. Bruce Arians and Chris Ballard both withdrew their names from consideration. Now, that wasn't because of the consultant. That wasn't because of Ryan Pace or Matt Nagy. They weren't there. That was because of the organization.
And that's what
Kyle's trying to say.
That's what I'm trying to say.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay, go ahead.
That's what I'm saying. Bill Polian can bring you, and Ernie Accorsi did bring the Bears good names. And then those guys got in the room. Then they went, maybe we don't want to be a part of this organization. So, Bill Polian can do a great job, and it can still fail, which is that is the concern. And that's why you have to hope that the Bears and George McCaskey in particular has learned his lesson from that and said, Bill, you give me the names, I will trust you, and that's the way we'll go.
Well, there's two different stories there. Chris, you have to remember, basically made his bones here in Chicago, before he went on to Kansas City and became a top candidate. And there's a story there that stays behind the record. But yes, he walked away from the job because of his concerns about his ability to succeed here. Bruce Arians is a different story. He's another one of these guys that gets held up as a shining example who's got his own issues. You look at the way he chose his first job. You look at the way he walked away from his first job. There's something that Bruce Arians has to own. And for reasons that escape me, nobody ever brings it up. He retired from the Arizona Cardinals because of health and family issues, wanting to take care of himself and spend more time with his family. And then 1 year later had his name out there for any job he thought was better and took one in Tampa Bay. So, when you get to credibility gaps on both sides. And so the Arians thing, I love when Bears fans go back to that one. I'm not sure that Arians would have become the guy that everybody wants to be their coach had he not gotten married to Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. And so, Ballard, on the other hand, is one of the best GMs in the NFL right now. But we're just kind of, I'm kind of nitpicking here now and splitting hairs. Let's get to our New Year's resolution, Kyle, which was to get as many of our visitors and questions in as we can. I don't make New Year's resolutions. I never keep them. But let's see what we can do about it this time around. I know we got a bunch of folks who want to join the conversation.
We're going to start at the top here with Gary Ross and work our way down.
All right. Well, Gary, that's a good place. So let's go to the top of the funnel. Gary wants to know who are the favorites for GM and coach at this time. Guys, I think all we can do is give our opinions because they're in the first interview process. They go through this, they get to second interviews, and even with what I'm hearing from sources about the way these interviews are going, we just don't know. Now, if the question is who are the best candidates, I think we each have our choices. I think we're going to be, posting some of that at shawlocal.com. I know we were going to put together a grid of our top three choices for each. I think that from what I'm hearing, the Bears understand that they made a mistake with a lifer in Mark Trestman, who had failed to get jobs he'd been interviewed for a number of times, and they thought they were going to be the ones to get it right. That was an absolute disaster. Excuse me. And then they went after Matt Nagy, who was, people forget, the hottest name out there. Every team in that cycle wanted him, and that's why the Bears got to him and nailed him down quick. And in the middle, they went for a third-timer who had just been fired, who ended up phoning it in for 3 years and was just as big a disaster as the other two. So my sense is that they like the idea of a couple of these middle-aged guys who have had a job once and have learned from their mistakes, but are not, at the point where they're so, enamored with their own ideas and their own thoughts and stubborn is the word I keep using about Matt Nagy and about George McCaskey, that I would focus probably on a Todd Bowles, a Doug Peterson, Jim Caldwell. Certainly, I don't even know if he's on their list yet. But I think that type of resume is what I'm hearing may have some appeal, especially with Bill Polian in the room. And then for GM, guys, it's an open race. I mean, the guy who comes in and impresses them the most. I would hope that they're looking at guys from winning organizations, guys, with scalps on the wall, so to speak. But these guys are all, for the most part, younger. I mean, to me, early 40s, mid 40s is definitely younger in this realm. And so, Sean, I don't know what you're hearing, but I think that's kind of the best way I can tee this up.
Yeah, and just from the research that I've done on a lot of these guys, I mean, if Rick Smith wants back in, I feel like that's a guy you would go to. He has the experience. He's did it for over a decade in Houston. And you're right. A lot of these guys, and particularly in the GM side of things, are there's a little bit of unknown, and we don't necessarily, you don't have all the footage of their interviews and stuff with the media, and a lot of these guys are working behind the scenes. It's hard to know, how much these guys, what these guys are going to come across like in interviews. And I'm kind of with you on the head coach thing. I think Todd Bowles is going to wind up being a head coach again at some point. I wouldn't have a problem with that hire. I mean, I didn't think he did all that bad of a job with the Jets. He won 10 games one year. I mean, the Jets haven't had a winning record since his first year in 2015. If I'm looking at like top coordinators, again, this is just my opinion. I feel like Brian Daboll is a guy who stands out. He's won everywhere he's been. I'm sure the Bills had some issues with their offense in the middle part of the year, and there's been questions about why they can't run the ball. But I mean, he's got such a long track record of success in various roles. I feel like that's a guy that could succeed at this level.
Kyle, yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are, but the one thing I want to add here is that the Bears have had one golden era in the modern era of football. The modern era is pretty much considered starting in 1967 with the announcement of the merger, and then 1970 with interleague play. And in those 50 plus years, the 80 Bears, the team that was built from 84 to really 91. And that team was built by Jim Finks and Bill Tobin. And they're guys that I had really solid relationships with. And they kind of helped raise me in the business. I was actually young once. I know people don't believe that. But it was Jim and Bill who told me, a couple things. Everybody knows about Jim Finks' mantra of you build teams with the offensive and defensive line first and then build out. But beyond that, their hiring and drafting philosophy was they wanted people who had been very successful in their last endeavor, whether that was players at college football or coaches and executives. They wanted people from big time markets who can handle the kind of exposure that comes in Chicago. And they wanted guys with winning track records, guys with winning histories. They valued that over traits, athleticism, speed, that type of thing. And they built, a lot of people, the majority believe that the 85 Bears were the greatest team for a single season in the history of the game. Every time they do the study, it comes out that way. That's how they built it. And so as you look at these candidates, I think that George would be well served to go back to that golden era that they had and apply some of those principles.
So, I mean, you're looking for, are we talking both on the general manager and the coaching side?
I think on any side, but where I'm going specifically to try and help us out here is on the GM side where we know less. So when I hear that you're going to the Cleveland Browns, for Glenn Cook and Kwesi Adolfo, I'm going to get the last part wrong, and I apologize. I don't know that I want. Yeah, Adolfo Mensa. I don't know that I want somebody out of the Cleveland Browns organization. On the other hand, when I hear Omar Khan, I start, turning somersaults. The Pittsburgh Steelers are the best organization in football. Morocco Brown has traveled a bit. He's got Bears history, and right now the Colts are doing it, pretty much as I know it ended badly this year, but that was on the field with Carson Wentz and some other issues. That gives him chops for me, and so. I think they're talking to somebody from the Rams. Now, I question the Rams' philosophy about not, ever caring about the draft, but nonetheless, they're winning football games. So I guess that's the point I'm trying to make for folks to look at here as we look at these GM candidates. Because the other thing is that look at the titles of these guys. Some are personnel directors. Some are football operations directors. Some are football operations and administration. Those are 3 different traits that you're looking for. And if in fact this guy is going to be the guy, everybody's hung up on whether they hire a president of football operations or a general manager. It doesn't matter what the title is as long as he has complete control. But that guy in complete control has to have, some expertise in all 3 of those areas. And so, that also, I think, makes it tricky identifying, which of these candidates might be the best. But I keep coming back to Rick Smith, who built really highly competitive Texan teams and had the best string of first-round draft choices over a decade of anybody I've ever seen, although there are some questions about what he did in later rounds and with some of his hires, in all fairness. And then I come to Omar Khan. And if the Bears could do what the Steelers have done, 2 GMs in the last 30 years now, 3 coaches in the last 50 years, 6 Super Bowl championships, I like the resume and the pedigree of an Omar Khan.
You and I are on the same page. Rick Smith and Omar Khan are my 2 top choices with the field that we currently know. Rick Smith did a fantastic job down in Houston for a decade, maybe a little more than that.
I
would say
12 years. Yeah,
I would say a little more than a decade.
He did hold both titles also.
Yeah.
He was, I believe he was personnel director, not general manager, but then he became either a vice president or president of operations.
Yeah, I mean, Rick Smith did a fantastic job down in Houston. Omar Khan, the question there, I'm sorry, I'm blanking out on the general manager's name.
Kevin Colbert.
Yeah, who's already announced that he is going to retire after the 2022 season. I think a lot of people assume that is Omar Khan's job if he wants it. We don't know that. That just was the assumption. Now, with the fact that he's interviewing, makes me think that that's a bad assumption. But
I've been digging on that a little bit, Kyle, and I'm hearing now, and I can't remember the guy's name, but there is somebody else in the organization who is thought to be a step below Omar on the org chart, but a little bit younger and maybe a little bit more well thought of by the Rooneys in certain areas of the job. This is sources and rumors. Don't know. I still think Omar Khan would be the favorite to get the job there. But the reports are that because there's even a question, because he hasn't been promised the job, that's why he's taking these interviews.
Yeah, I mean, so I have strong interest in Omar Khan. On the coaching side, Sean mentioned Brian Daboll. He's one of my absolute favorites when it comes to this opening. I just like what he does. I like what he would bring to the organization when you're trying to develop Justin Fields. And now I know I say that, and we don't want to repeat a Matt Nagy in terms of a guy that doesn't understand how to lead as a head coach and is focused too much on one position or on his offense. Yeah. But I like what Brian Daboll brings to the table. He's a Patriots guy, and I talked about that on Monday, which brings me to my other thing with Hub. You mentioned before we even started that Brian Flores is apparently the favorite in Vegas currently.
Betting favorite.
The betting favorite.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean anything. But I mean, Vegas, they know a thing or two. And I don't believe Brian Flores deserved to be fired from Miami. What he was able to get out of that roster. We have heard reports, and here's where things get weird because you never know what's spin and what's real. So since then, we've heard that there's been some friction between Flores and the front office there.
I'm sorry for you getting the podcast. Liza just made her appearance. Liza the puppy is now in the podcast for anybody joining us live. She's not gonna leave me alone until I give her camera shot. So go ahead, Kyle.
Oh no, I'm sitting here. I don't know if you guys can even notice. Like I'm twitching. Yeah, mine is sitting here next to me, requesting pets, and I don't want him to start barking. But I have a little
Flores. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, yeah. I'm not petting Brian Flores. Brian Flores. Him coming from the Patriots background as well. And then hearing the reports of him kind of being a bit of a nuisance and a control freak gives me a little bit of pause in that area.
Yeah, just a quick thought on Brian Daboll, because he is impressive and a lot more than just what he's done with that offense is impressive. But people don't realize this is his 4th offensive coordinator job, and I don't want another Mark Trestman. No, he is not. Trestman's issues were people skills, and it was obvious from the jump. And I don't know what Phil Emery was thinking when he did that. I think
Phil Emery was thinking, I'm going to be the smartest guy in the room, is
Yeah.
what Phil Emery was thinking.
I think you're probably exactly right. And we know how it turned out. But I do worry, the first 3 coordinator jobs didn't turn out so well. And so I think you dig deeper, you do more homework on that. But I would not be in the least bit unhappy with Brian Daboll, and certainly would not criticize that selection if that was the choice. And again, I keep saying I've been doing my homework. That's what we're doing right now. Brian Flores is going to bring some baggage. And yes, I don't understand why the Dolphins would fire him, but now I do know why they fired him. And it is all about people skills and communication, and the fact that he and Chris Greer, the general manager, could not coexist. And the owner, Stephen Ross, chose the GM. Now, you've got a situation where the Bears are doing interviews and are interviewing him without a GM in place. That would really make me nervous. And then I look at the Belichick coaching tree. And while there is no question in my mind that Bill Belichick is the greatest coach of all time, forgive me, George Halas fans, I got Papa Bear number 2. But, Belichick is the guy, but it only works for him. And the way he carries himself troubles people sometimes. And all these other guys, you look at Matt Patricia and even Charlie Weiss, and now you look at Flores. The one exception to the rule is Mike Vrabel, who's figured it out. But Vrabel did his coaching in Houston. He didn't do it in New England. These guys who come out of that New England tree, they all want to be Bill Belichick, but they're not Bill Belichick, and it just doesn't work. So, and then one other quick point. We'll get back to the next question. You're absolutely right, Kyle. Vegas knows a lot. What they know is how to keep the same amount of money on either side of the bet. That's where their expertise is. There's nobody in Vegas who's commenting on who would be the best coach for the Bears. They're commenting on what bettors and fans want. It's the same thing with football games. They come up with a number that they think is going to get the same amount of money on either side of the game. They don't, know who's going to win. They're not really predicting that. And so I just think it's always, I have my co-executive producer of the Pro Football Weekly TV show, Jim Kezios, who's one of my best friends, and I love the guy. But we're constantly getting in these arguments about, well, this is what was expected, and this is what everybody said, because he's looking at point spreads and Vegas lines, and I'm like, no, that's gambling. That's not football analysis. So I'm the one who brought it up. I apologize for that as far as the Vegas odds on the coach thing.
All right, well, let's move on to a question here from our guy Rick Gonzalez. I'll pop this up if I can get this to work. There we go.
Rick wants to know bigger need in the offseason, wide receiver or cornerback. I think it's pretty clearly wide receiver because you need at least 4, maybe 5. And cornerback, if you've got 3 good ones, you're in good shape. And, I think Jalen Johnson is going to go to Pro Bowls. And I am not yet ready to write off Kindle Vildor or Thomas Graham Jr., who intrigued me. I think they have a need at cornerback. I'd like to see him bring in more talent, Sean, but wide receiver, Darnell Mooney has a chance to be the best number 2 in the league. He's never going to be a number. I shouldn't say never. I look at him now with 2 years to study, and he's just not a number 1. And so you need a number 1 and probably a 3, 4, and 5. So I think wide receiver is an easy winner for me.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. Absolutely wide receiver. I mean, Mooney's your only regular contributor who's under contract right now for next year. Sure, Daz Newsome is a guy, but he hasn't really proven anything on the NFL level. You're going to need a bunch of them, because you got more of those on the field than you usually do at cornerback. And, I like, Jalen Johnson is, you're set there. You got a good piece in him, and you're kind of you got some guys like Graham and Vildor who you're trying to figure out what exactly they are. I think Graham showed some promise, and that's something to be excited about moving ahead.
You can actually go to shawlocal.com right now. Sean has a piece up, some analysis, a breakdown of who is under contract, who's not, how much cap space the Bears have. And I cringe looking at the offensive side of the ball. The Bears need a lot of help at wide receiver. Not just at wide receiver, at tight end as well. I believe Cole Kmet is the only tight end under contract. I think Jesper Horst said might be a restricted free agent, if I remember.
Yeah,
right.
He'd probably be a guy who comes back, but he's a restricted free agent.
He just got signed to a reserve futures contract again. Guys, I love Jesper Horsted, and I know it's going to be a new regime, but it's 3 years now. So the hope that he could turn into an outstanding number 2 move tight end, a guy who makes big plays for you. But I don't think he's going to answer the tight end depth issue behind Cole Kmet.
So I mean, they're going to need multiple wide receivers. Talking about this, I just remembered I texted you guys after we talked about this a little bit a couple of weeks ago, and I went and looked at free agent wide receivers. And I said, I told you, I warned you then, and I'm going to start it now, that you're going to hear me just champion DJ Chark a lot this offseason. I don't think, given they have cap money, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of positions they're going to need to fill on this team. I don't know if they're going to be able to go out and sign this huge contract for a wide receiver. I think you're going to be looking at guys like DJ Chark, kind of that second tier. And one other thing, I'm going to go back to another text. I was half joking the other day that I was ranking Dan Quinn number 85 on my list, and Hub, you agreed with me. So we're just going to put that out there. We're talking about coaches that we wanted. I'm pretty sure Hub and I are in agreement. Dan Quinn, not a good hire if that was to take place.
Well, I'm not as emphatic about it as you.
I'm pretty emphatic.
I don't know that he'd be number 85 on my list, but he's certainly 6 or 7. I have concerns there. Going back to DJ Chark, though, I've got a question for you, Kyle. Is your infatuation with him just because you think he's the best of what they can afford, or because you think he has the ability to become a number one?
I think he has the ability to. It's a combination, I guess. I'm looking at upside, potential upside at relative cost, and I think he has the potential to be number one. I think he was on his way there before things went into a complete disaster of a season in Jacksonville. He ended up hurt anyway. I don't know how much he would have performed in a terrible offense with Urban Meyer there, but it's interesting because it's the same thing, or at least the same franchise where you had Allen Robinson, who missed pretty much that entire season before and went into free agency and then blossomed with the Bears. I could see that scenario for DJ Chark as well.
Well, yeah, a couple things about wide receivers, and we'll get to the next question. I was just going to mention, the Bears gave Allen Robinson a very attractive free agent contract at the time, and they were panned for it because he actually had missed 2 seasons earlier with an ACL, come back and had a average season, and nobody knew what to expect. And the Bears ended up getting a true number one receiver at market rate the first year or two, and then at a bargain rate, second half of year 2, year 3. Wide receivers traditionally have been the best, have often been found in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th rounds. I mean, you can go over the second round at least. When you look at some of the guys now with Juju Smith-Schuster, and you look at Deontay Johnson, 2 guys in Pittsburgh. You look at where Antonio Brown originally came from. I'm talking about the player, not the, where we're at right now. It's a fairly long list, but that trend has changed in the last 3, 4, 5 years, 6 years, as we've gotten these freak athletes at the position, and the Julio Joneses of the world kind of started this trend, and then you look at DeAndre Hopkins and Michael Thomas and some of these guys who've really come on. So you can do it any way you want. And I think one interesting question is going to be, once the new regime is in place, what are the chances that there's at least a reasonable conversation with Allen Robinson? I don't know that Allen would acknowledge this at this point or even agrees with me, and I know his agent wouldn't, but it was his agent who screwed up the negotiations last time in terms of not having a realistic understanding of what the market was. And with the slate wiped clean and talking to new people, would they value Allen in that way? Would somebody coming in saying, no, Robinson fell off the cliff this year? Or is the evaluation that it was the situation he was in that caused the awful year that he got? Because regardless of it, the awful year that he had is what's going to set his market. And so it may be, with everything else that they had to fix, that the answer is, he's not going to get $18 million as a franchise wide receiver. Let's not forget that Allen Robinson was one of the 5 highest paid receivers in football this year. If, Robinson and his agent get smart and realize the market is way down on them right now, would it be wise to stay with what and take a 1-year prove-it deal at $10 or $11 or $12 million? You could do that. And that would also, tell us a lot about what Allen Robinson thinks about Justin Fields. So I don't know that any of that could happen. But it's kind of interesting to keep an eye on.
Well, we're bringing up Justin Fields here, so I'm going to bring up this next question from Thomas Klein, who was asking about Justin.
Tom wants to know, how big of a setback will it be for Fields to learn a new offense in his second season? None at all, because he never learned the first offense. What can the Bears do to ease the transition? Guys,
I don't know if he didn't learn the offense.
I'm kidding. I'm just
he just was slow to react to what he was seeing on the field.
Guys, I don't know how many different ways I can say it. I love Justin Fields, the prospect, and I think he has a chance to be a franchise quarterback. And we get hung up in a lot of this. It's social media chatter. Okay, it's if you're capable of being a franchise quarterback, the transition from one system to another isn't that great. It's not about what you're trying to do. It's how you're able to understand what the guys who are trying to stop it are doing, and so it's a factor. I'm not pretending it's not. But the unfortunate reality is at the end of this first season, we don't know any more about, Justin Fields' eventual ceiling in the NFL than we did going in. And I will tell you that this belief in Bears Nation that he absolutely is the next, Patrick Mahomes or whatever you want him to be is not universal amongst NFL evaluators and experts. Everyone agrees he's got great traits, and from our year's exposure to him, Sean, I would say I'm very impressed with him as far as, being a bright, well-spoken guy, as far as his toughness, his attitude, everything about him seems right. But we have those 11 games to look at, and they were ugly. And the idea that was all the coach's fault is really silly. And so, the jury is a lot of it was the coach's fault, but more of it is the player's fault. He's the guy who's playing. And so, the question is, what did he learn from this? And, what will the ability of the next regime be to develop him?
Yeah, I'm not worried about Justin Fields learning a new offense. I think he's going to handle that just fine. I mean, I think he did well enough learning Matt Nagy's offense this past season. I think, like you're saying, Hub, it's more telling, what he how he responds to defenses and how he reacts to these live in-game situations, more so what the defense is doing than necessarily what his offense is running. I think that's not going to be a problem, no matter who the coach is that comes in and installs their own offense.
Kyle, what's telling from the people I'm talking to and just from the tape I've studied myself, what was his actual development as the season went on, and particularly the last few games before the injuries. He was getting better with the RPOs, getting better with knowing when to pull the ball and when not to. He wasn't great at it, but he was improving there. He was getting he appeared to be getting a little better sense of his pocket presence. I mean, that game in Green Bay, the thing that was the most impressive about it was that he pretty much made the right decision every time as to when to leave the pocket and then was productive when he did leave the pocket. But then he came back the next week or two and seemed to not have that sense again. But those were areas where he was getting better. Where he showed really no improvement all year long was in holding the ball too long and identifying, where to go and then getting the ball out quick enough. Holding the ball too long and getting the ball out quick enough are two different things. Once you've recognized what the defense is doing, it's blind faith. We see it all the time. You got to throw the ball before your receiver comes out of his break. You've got to be the expert on that. And he never got to that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair criticism. The original question was, what can we do to ease in transition? I think you guys are both right. I don't think that's the concern. He's the work ethic is there, and he's really intelligent. That's the main concern when you have a new offense is, I don't mean to sound mean, but this guy's smart enough to learn it. Is he willing to work hard? I don't think that either of those things are going to be a problem with Justin. It's all going to be on the field for him. I still think he's going to be just fine. I think he's going to be a good quarterback, but you are right. He holds the ball too long. Yeah. There are things that are a concern from him. We also saw things that are, high upside. Really, really high upside plays from him. So,
guys, I think the thing that everybody has to remember, excuse me, he was the fourth quarterback taken in that draft. That's what NFL evaluators, or at least the ones who took quarterbacks, thought. And so there were some questions coming out of college. Now, again, I love the move the Bears made. I think they may have their franchise quarterback. I've talked to Matt Nagy about this off the record, and he thinks they've got their franchise quarterback. He's not, ready to give up on him at all. And Matt Nagy's opinion matters, regardless of what you think of the job he did as a head coach. So I think that Bears fans should continue to be excited, but just don't be blind. Don't assume that it's all the coaches and the decisions and the system and all of that. The young man does still have things to prove.
I'm going to throw a comment up here from this person here. It's not Faith. They were all hitch routes. The Bears did not run all hitch routes. Now, where the Bears offense was not very good is a lot of times their route combinations weren't ideal. When I say ideal, I don't know how else. The Bears route combinations a lot of the season sucked, but they weren't just running hitch routes. They just had a lot of guys that were ending up in the same spot on the field too often.
Yeah, I mean, listen, guys, this is where you get folks who how do I say it without offending anybody? A lot of you believe that you're football experts, and I know that you love the game, and I know you love your team, and I'm sure some of you, do study it and watch it. But a lot
of it's because of the hitched route, because the Bears kept getting crap, and understandably so, and justifiably so, because they like to run hitch routes 4 yards long on a 3rd and 5. So everyone likes to make fun of them for the hitch routes. But that wasn't the main issue with the offense.
Yeah, I don't even know what we're calling hitch routes. They were actually wide receiver screens, and flat passes to running backs. I mean, it's the narrative is developed around the coaching staff that they were all complete boobs and everything they did was wrong, and that's just not accurate. But they did do a lot that wasn't working, and they refused to adjust and make changes. And certainly that hampered Fields' development and everybody's development. That's why they got fired. But it was a derivative of the Kansas City offense, which is one of the best offenses in the NFL. And not everything about it was bad. Not everything about it was unworkable. It never got executed properly. And when they, failed to identify what their players weren't executing properly, they failed to make adjustments to put them in better positions to succeed. I don't know if you guys agree, but I think that's kind of the best analysis we can do at this point, looking backwards.
So the Andy Reid offense, the Kansas City offense it's really advanced. There's a lot of moving parts, and Andy Reid makes it work because Andy Reid is really good at it. When you try and mimic it, and when you try and learn from it, I mean, you saw it a little bit when the Bears did have success with it. It had that look of the Andy Reid offense back in 2018, the way they utilized their tight ends, some of the screens that they did, and that really evaporated over the last couple seasons. And when that happens, that offense is going to look really bad really quickly.
Yeah, Sean, the Andy Reid offense right now, the Patrick Mahomes offense is actually very different from the Alex Smith offense. And Matt Nagy was trying to run the Alex Smith offense, not the Patrick Mahomes offense. And the most exciting thing about Justin Fields is that the comp for me is Brett Favre and Patrick Mahomes in terms of traits and style, which is very different from the comp for Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees and Peyton Manning and all these other guys. And so again, to Kyle's point, there's so many moving parts that you just can't make it as simple as a lot of folks want to make it.
I'm totally twisting your words here, Hub, but that sounds like an argument for Eric Bieniemy.
Well, I think Eric Bieniemy deserves a shot. I just don't think he's going to get it, and very unfairly, it's going to be because of the Matt Nagy experience. Yeah. I mean, I have no problem with Eric Bieniemy. I just think that, what I have a problem with is that head coaches get hired, put in unworkable situations, and then get fired after 1 year. And that brings me back to near where we started here. The fact what the Texans did to David Culley should be illegal. I mean, they brought him in after the fact. He couldn't even put his own coaching staff together. He had that team competing all year long, and now he's fired for some reason. And it doesn't make any sense to me. And I've got to go back and check my facts, but I'm reasonably sure that Nick Caserio was hired first. He was in place when they hired Culley. And now he gets to just throw him under the bus. And by the way, Nick Caserio, another guy off the Patriots tree, we'll see how it works out. And so, I look at Eric Bieniemy. He's done everything he could do to earn a shot as a head coach. Now, there's another guy on that staff who has too. Dave Toub should be, a leader in a lot of these interviews. I haven't even heard of him getting an interview yet. And it makes no sense to me. Some of that is the way that these guys interview and the way they present themselves, which doesn't, disqualify them from head. If Bill Belichick had to go in and interview for a head coaching job today, I don't know how many people would hire him if they didn't know, who he was and what he does. It's part of the problem with this, but Eric Bieniemy, I mean, based on his resume and his track record, Kyle. I'd have no problem with that. I just think that, with the Matt Nagy experience, that would be really hard for the Bears to sell. Now, apparently they're not all that great at making the public happy. So, I wouldn't rule it out, but, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a big advocate of Eric Bieniemy too, but I don't see the Bears going that route for the reasons you just stated. The thing with Culley, it's really crappy.
I know what you almost said.
yeah. I got to remember, still on the podcast. Yeah, I mean, it's a really crappy situation. I have to assume like he had to have known going into that job that was a real possibility. Considering the contract they gave him too, it was only a 2-year deal if I read it correctly.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So like he had to have known that there was a good chance that was going to happen. I do think it was kind of odd how long it took for them to make that decision, or it was. You would have thought if that was already kind of hashed out that it would have been done on Monday or Tuesday at the latest, but I don't know.
Guys, you talk about organizational dysfunction, and everybody thinks it starts and stops in Chicago. The majority of NFL organizations are run this way because they're rich people playing with toys, and in Chris McNair, we don't even know how smart the guy is. His dad, is the guy who built the family fortune and bought the team. The team was pretty well run under him until Bob McNair got sick, tragically, and of course passed away a few years ago. So anyone who thinks that this organizational dysfunction in Chicago is the exception, it's actually closer to the rule, and it's just a bigger picture look at the NFL.
If you're a candidate going into Houston, you got to have a lot of questions for just the way that situation developed, and what you're right, Hub. It's insane that they would fire this coach after 1 year, David Culley, and you have to go in there asking questions. I mean, I don't know who's going to want to go work for them, especially with. Sure, they did well with what they had, but I mean, what's your future at quarterback? What exactly does this team look like moving ahead?
Well, I think if you look at the trade window opens again and I forget the dates, mid-February, early March, whenever it may be, and now we can pretty much assume, if you want to make a smart bet, I don't know if there is such a thing as a smart bet, but we probably can assume that the Deshaun Watson trade to Miami will happen now. Tua Tagovailoa will probably be part of the compensation, and then those two organizations will start to move forward the way that they probably did want to all along. And, we can only assume, I haven't spoken to him, so it's not fair to paint him with it, but I assume that Brian Flores' protestations and also, public relations realities in Miami kept it from happening sooner, but that's probably the future of the next two of those organizations, and we'll see what happens.
Can I throw something out here on that really quickly? We know Brian Flores, one of the things he has said, criticized with essentially the QB play in Miami. Brian Flores, Nick Caserio, obviously the New England tie. There's a chance Brian Flores could end up in Houston and they don't trade Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, I mean, anything's open, but if you take that a step further, he criticized the QB play, and folks who think his firing was justified criticize his handling of his offensive coordinator job. And the whole offensive coaching side on that thing was called.
I know, but what all I'm saying here is if Nick Caserio does go out and lands Brian Flores, and they've made the decision, we can't get what we feel is fair value for Deshaun Watson because of his legal status. We're going to bring in a coach that wanted him in Miami, and roll with it. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but Kyle, the part I'm not sure of is I don't think he wanted him in Miami. I don't know which side of the table he was on. If he was the one.
Well, I'm just speculating.
Yeah. Because all we heard at least half a dozen times he came out and said, "Stop it, Tua's my guy." Now, whether he had to do that because he was coaching or because that was the way he felt, I don't know. But it certainly created the impression for me that he was the one who wanted Watson, and that it was. I'm not said that didn't want Watson, and that the team did. But I got more homework to do on that one. So
yeah. All right. Well, I can't. We should wrap it up here. We're at about an hour. I can't find the question. So there's a couple other questions about the offensive line from Tim and Kawhi, guys. We'll get to that next week if you guys stop back in. I do want to focus on the coach and GM right now as much as we can. And the way I want it in, like I said, I can't find the question was, originally we thought there were not going to be many head coaching openings coming into this. We're up to 8 right now. And the question was essentially, how does that change your calculus in terms of how aggressive you are in going out and hiring a coach? Do you still need to wait for a general manager, or if you have a guy you really want for coach, you just pull the trigger?
Well, I guess I'm adamant about it. If there's any hope that some of this dysfunction in Chicago is going away, you have to have the top football person in place to be the person who makes it happen. And if you hire a coach before you hire a GM or a director of football operations or whatever it may be, you are not going to get the best candidate for GM or director of football operations, because you're telling them right off the bat, we want to put you in charge of everything except this, the most important hire in the organization, and I don't know how you can sell that. Maybe I'm wrong, but you've got to get the GM or the top football guy in place first. You've got to let him participate in the final interviews for your head coach. And you got to consider the likelihood that once you hire him, he may want to add another name or two to his interview list because he's going to want his guy.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And that's my concern even now with them interviewing coaches is then let's say they do make the general manager hire first. And then they go, well, here's a list of guys of coaches we've already done the initial interviews with. Go ahead and choose from them. You know what I mean? That is a concern when they've already started the coaching process.
And George said this week that, asked directly about this. Well, how will you know if the coach is the right guy if you don't have a GM yet? And he said, he kept it real short. He said one sentence to the effect of, we'll know, in that interview, we'll know. And, you just don't know how this, you can have a good feeling about a guy. You can believe, he can say all the right things, but you got to be on the same page with the general manager. It's not going to work. I mean, we kind of saw that was similar, not the exact same, but similar to what happened when they hired Pace and Fox, and that,
he was pushed in that direction.
He was pushed in that direction, and he was on the job for a week and had no experience as a GM. Hiring a guy who had been to 2 Super Bowls made a lot of sense at the time. But you don't want to repeat past mistakes.
And guys, I just gave half the equation. Now look at the other half of the equation. If you're a top head coaching candidate and you're being hired without knowing who your boss is going to be, there is nothing reasonable or logical about the idea that you can hire a coach before you hire a GM. Now, yes, there's only 32 of these jobs, 32 of each, top football guy and top coach. A lot of guys are desperate to have them. Everyone comes into the room with a huge ego. Everybody believes they're the best and they can do the job. You wouldn't want them if they didn't. So there are guys that will make that mistake and say, well, I can handle it, whatever it is. But if there's anything we know, you can't handle it, whatever it is. You've got to be in the right situation. And I know Bears fans became nauseous at some point about hearing about the great collaboration between Ryan and Matt. But trust me, people, it is important. It didn't work here, obviously. And it doesn't have to be a collaboration. One guy can be the boss and the other guy can be the employee, but that relationship has to be solid as concrete. And neither one is going to get you the best candidate if you don't get your hiring in the proper order. And this isn't about players. This isn't about bringing in the best talent. This is about bringing in the best bosses, the best managers. And if there's no clarity to who that guy is, then God help us all.
Sean, is your water glass one of those tall beer glasses? Is that what you just picked up?
This is a tall Guinness glass.
That's what I thought. I drink
a lot of water.
Getting going a little early on a Friday morning, aren't you, buddy?
I don't know. It sounds more to me like he drinks a lot of Guinness, but that's a man after my own heart. Guys, I would never, not that anybody cares, but it's a Bear story. Never really understood dark beer, struggled with it with stout and anything like that. And then in 1997, we went to Ireland, and the Bears and the Steelers went to Ireland, and we spent a week there. And I was introduced to Black and Tans. And anyone who doesn't drink Guinness is missing a real treat now. And if it's a little too stout for you, then you get a black and tan, which of course is a regular malt and a stout. So Sean has been very high in my estimation since the day he joined us, but he just took another step up because knowing the Guinness is in the house, there you go. And it's
I got the poster back there too.
Yeah. Now when we say some of the silly things we say, I don't worry about what he's drinking. So it's I think, guys, we've run over time, and not that there's a time limit on us, but we know we only are entitled to so much of your attention. So we want to thank you all so much for joining us again. Really, we are updating hourly at this point, not even daily. ShawLocal.com, Bears News, Bears Analysis, Bears Insiders, where you're going to get the best coverage of everything that is happening going forward on the Bears hiring of a new general manager to run the football operation and a new head coach. We've already got a fair amount of background on what we discussed here up right now at ShawLocal.com. And if you want to get that detail, Kyle, is there an offer running right now? I'm not even sure, but I do know that even at regular rates, it's a bargain.
Let me double check before I say something wrong. Pull up the.
That's why I asked him. I didn't want to be the guy who screwed it up.
I mean, we always, right now we still have the 12 weeks for 99 cents deal going. So not really a better deal than you can get right now than get your first 12 weeks for 99 cents.
Yeah, and guys, just to be clear, we love talking to you for free. We don't want your money, but this is the reality of the media business these days. This is the only way that we all stay employed, and ours is the best bargain you're going to find. So certainly at least give it a look and consider it. If not, stay with us on our podcasts here because we really enjoy getting to visit with you. Again, if you want to be part of the podcast, we stream live on StreamYard every Friday morning at 9:30 Chicago time. You can get into the podcast by going to @Kyle Nabors on his Twitter account, @Sean_Hammond, or @Hub Arkush. That gets you live into these podcasts for this week. Thank you so much for being with us. We did have a special edition, which we announced on our Twitter accounts earlier this week because of the huge breaking news. If there is huge breaking news, I suspect we may do that again. So keep your eye on those Twitter accounts, and we'll let you know if that's coming. If not, next Friday, 9:30 Chicago time, we'll be back. Thank you so much for being with us this week.